sometimes it's about changing out one or more of the leaders. And that doesn't have to be an awful thing, right? It's how do you help this person who took the company to here exit gracefully, go on and do their next thing, understand why they're exiting. And then how do you bring the best person in to lead the company forward? And for us and for the field of organizational psychology, the answer is you do it through strong psychometric assessments.
Thank you for stopping by Nurture Small Business Podcast. I am your host, Denise Cagan. If you're looking for stories that lift up women business owners, both in their personal and professional lives, you are at the right place. As always, if you like what you hear on today's podcast, please share it. You have my gratitude for doing so. Have you ever assigned an employee a task and wondered, why did they do it that way? Have you ever thought about why a person left when you thought they were really happy at your job? Well, guess what? Today's person on our podcast is Sandy Fiaschetti. I had to ask, Sandy Fiaschetti. She is an organizational psychologist with Lodestone People Consulting. Welcome to the show, Sandy.
Well, it's good to be here.
So you're going to tell us all about why people do the things they do.
Well, I can at least try to tell you about why people do what they do at work, because that's what organizational psychology is about. I won't get into do they love their mother and, were they bullied and all of that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, as business owners, we are concerned with all that. And sometimes even in small businesses, people do unload some of those, did they get along with their mother stuff with us? So, but it's important for us to understand how people are going to react to certain things, even changes in technology, even those are some things that could impact workflow. So tell me about your background before we get into all of this.
Sure. Yeah. So I am an organizational psychologist by training, a PhD from Wayne State University in Michigan. I'm from Michigan, a Detroit person, so a lot of like practical automotive and consulting in my background. Spent some time working in private equity out in San Francisco and loved that as an industry. And so then I started Lodestone in 2021 to really bring all of organizational psychology to companies that are specifically owned privately. So spent the first part of my career working with the Fords and Chryslers and Lears of the world and decided, the middle market and the lower middle market can really benefit from some of this people science. And so that's what we do at Lodestone, and that's why we do it.
Okay. So you mentioned some big companies there. Is that who you normally work with?
No, not anymore. So that was the first part of my career. Really, I mean, from Detroit, right? You can't help but work in automotive and that kind of thing. But we work at Lodestone specifically with middle market and lower middle market companies that are privately held, companies that are growing and can benefit from adding some structure around their people practices to help them, back to your original question, understand why people do what they do at work and to sort of, set the ground for making all of those behaviors do what's best to move the business forward. So we're really about how do you maximize performance to make a company better and performance of people.
Can you give me a couple of examples of things that companies have come to you and asked you to help with?
Yeah. We do a lot of work with the C-suite or the management team. A lot of times when a company is changing hands, there's this, we understand who they are on paper. We understand financially who they are, right? Like people do all this financial due diligence. They're coming to us now for the people due diligence. Like who is this management team we're getting? Can we work with them for the entire time that we own them? If so, what can we do to help them make the journey is the phrase you hear a lot, right? Like a scaling business, as you know, has different challenges than an early business. And so a lot of what we're doing with our clients is understanding the leadership teams that they're getting and then helping those leadership teams develop additional leadership skills. And sometimes it's about changing out one or more of the leaders. And that doesn't have to be an awful thing, right? It's how do you help this person who took the company to here exit gracefully, go on and do their next thing, understand why they're exiting. And then how do you bring the best person in to lead the company forward? And for us and for the field of organizational psychology, the answer is you do it through strong psychometric assessment. So we do a lot of executive assessment where we do a personality inventory. We do a pretty cool 3-hour business simulation where they, like a pilot in a flight simulator, people get to demonstrate in our fictitious company how they would answer emails because they answer them. They're not telling us what they would do, they're doing. They're coaching a direct report who's a little bit unhappy. They're creating a strategy plan, right? Like we're watching people do the behaviors that matter to the role. And then we wrap an interview on the end of that, understanding what they're like in their real world and how they approached our simulation and what's similar and different. And then our team puts all of that together. So there's a lot of science, a little bit of art, right, from doing it. And then we're giving the companies back that profile in a business context. So we're not saying, here's Joe's personality or here's Sally's personality. We're saying you told us you wanted this person to grow the business, build a team, and create opportunities in new markets, let's just say. Well, here's our perspective based on the data they showed us of how they can do all of those things for you. And here are the competencies that they showed us that underpin all of that. And then even further, here's why this person is risk averse. This person showed to be arrogant, whatever the case may be, right? Like we'll go from the behavior down to the personality. So that's a lot of what we do. I know I said a ton there. We also help people with development programs, like you have a class of high potential leaders, you want to develop them over the course of the year. And executive coaching is a big part of what we do, right? Like we get all this great data, we put this leader in place. It'd be silly to just let it go. Let that person have the value of that feedback and help them in their first 4 to 6 months on the job.
Wow. Okay. So that was a lot. Let's unpack it just a little bit. So the 3-hour assessment actually made me think about, we do working interviews with our new hires, and we don't have one for leadership because our preference is to promote within, though that's not always available. So how do you go about even thinking about how to put those things together?
Yeah. That is essentially one of the underpinnings of the field of organizational psychology, right? So we spent years getting our PhDs. We have colleagues who spent years getting their PhDs, understanding human performance, understanding statistics. And so there's a lot that goes into building a simulation. And so I guess I say that to say, I love when people do work samples like you're talking about doing, because it's better than just doing an interview. And there's a little part of me that cringes just a little bit because it's like, oh my, I mean, I would not, like my husband's an automotive engineer. I would not think, you know what, I've driven a car. I could probably build one, like it doesn't make sense. But when it comes to people kind of feel like, well, I know people, I can build it. And I'm like, well, you might want to add some science. You might want to ask some people who build them for a living, right? So there's just a lot that goes into it, but then the shell is there, right? So we're not building this for every single client. That's not really feasible. It's more like configuring what components of that matter to that client and doubling down on the measurement of any, set of the competencies that they need. Does that answer?
You did. Okay. Absolutely. I think I can honestly say from our perspective, we've seen a lot of different things from the working interview. We see how a person works. We can tell one individual in particular was extremely chaotic in their thought process. And that is not everything else before that period was amazing about this person. Had we not done a working interview, we would have hired them.
Yeah, exactly. So take that and imagine it on steroids a little bit, right? So we will see some of those same things, even down to the metadata of all the emails that we gave them. Did they approach them linearly? How long did they take on them? Were they cycling back to them and so on? And, if we had that candidate you were talking about, we'd come back to you in our data review with a point of view on the chaos. And we would balance in, as I'm imagining you did, all the other things that were around it, right? And so part of what we are trained to do is to not over-index on things that are vivid instance, or they're the first thing that happened. Like you think about those stories about the people who walk in and they spill their coffee on the way in, or they say something dumb at the beginning. Human nature is to actually overweight those things. We try to suspend, or we do through our training, suspend that human nature and say, yeah, that person was chaotic. And that's why we gave them a red development needed on planning and organizing. And here's what we saw. They're really actually quite strategic. We saw them doing this and that and the other thing. They have a penchant for coaching other people. They're agreeing on that. And then you take all of that and decide, is that red on chaos worth it to me or not? And you can decide, no, because that's a deal breaker for us, right? Or you can say, okay, I know all of this. How do I support that person as they come into a chaotic environment and help them deal with that situation? But it's all data for you as the business owner to decide, is the point.
So you work largely in the leadership arena and helping either develop or build what's there. And sometimes you even have the daunting job of saying, yeah, that person doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one that people are like, oh, how does that work? Well, I think, how does that work? We give the decision makers, the business owners, the data, right? And they can decide if they can work, but it's going to be a long haul. Like, sometimes let's try, let's do some executive coaching. Let's, help this person with managing their chaos. And so one of our coaches will work with that person. But then sometimes there's this coaching out of the organization. And the good thing is we're still humanists. I mean, we're psychologists, we're people at heart. And so we have our science and our data, but we know that people who aren't successful where they are generally not happy where they are. And so helping that person understand the data, and they know it, right? Like they don't need our simulation to tell them they don't understand what this new owner wants from them or whatever. But if we can help them go to the next thing, right? Because we can say like the chaos and the speed of change you really struggled with. Is that something that you're struggling with here and now? Oh yeah, you wouldn't believe how much I'm struggling with, whatever. And then moving them to, you tend to like, at least what you showed us, you tend to like more orderly situations. You tend to like things that are more stable. Have you thought about maybe it's time to exit this thing? Have you ever worked in a large company? Maybe you'd like to go back there. Oh my gosh, that would be so great. I would, right? So you help the person see there's a better fit for them. And then everybody wins. And, they preserve dignity. You're not there to say, hey, man, you're out. You're there to say, it's kind of like a fish can't ride a bicycle. And these new owners have just given you a bicycle. Why don't we just go find you a new pond? And, everybody wins. Yeah. So it's not always pleasant, right? Sometimes people don't want to go. But most of the time, with good coaching and, kind of digging a little bit, they're not happy there.
What I have found is that sometimes when people are burning out or they're performing badly, they need a manager to ask them, hey, are you happy here? Is this the right fit? Because that gives them permission to actually speak about it, to acknowledge it. And I have used that method before. And sometimes it's resulted in somebody going, no, I admit I'm burning out. It has nothing to do with work. I love working here. And sometimes it has been, you're right. This isn't a great fit for me.
Yeah. The key to what you said there, I mean, there's so much in that. You're asking the right questions. You're giving people the space for it. Like, that's good coaching. That's good talent development. I would give that a green,
Thank you.
because it's so many times leaders think they have to tell the answers and give the tasks. And if you ask the right questions, that's what a good coach does. Ask the right questions and let their story come out of them. And then they own that too. When people have agency over what's happening, it's not happening to them. It's happening, with them and through them. And that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's being not intimidated by asking those questions. And I know that some of my leaders are not quite there yet.
Yeah.
It is really, it's been beneficial for us because it's, again, like I said, it's given the people who really, they were here and they just didn't want to let it go because they felt like it might have been a failure. It gave them permission, to say, hey, I don't want to be here. And it gave us an opportunity beyond that to build the team better.
Yeah, that's so, yeah, I'm totally in agreement with it. There are two questions that I use all the time when I'm coaching leaders. One of them is, well, what did they say when you asked them about it? Because so many times it's like, oh, I didn't ask them. Well, then you should. I don't know why you're here with me, right? And the other question I like to ask people is, what is your contribution to this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Because nothing is ever one-sided. Like, oh, this person doesn't know, they're not getting their job done. What's your contribution? Are you spending enough time setting the situation up for success? Are you guiding them versus just dumping and running? Like, there's all kinds of reasons,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always a contribution on both sides.
I agree, wholeheartedly. Back to data. Okay.
Yeah.
You have mentioned data numerous times.
Yeah.
As a business owner, data can be exhilarating and intimidating. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes just raw data is more intimidating than anything, especially if we're left to interpret it. So as you're talking about data with business owners, tell me a little bit about how you present it to them so it makes sense.
Yes. That is very important to me. Maybe it's that automotive background where there would be charts everywhere and too much data is just noise. You're looking to give people information. And so for us, all of what I just described to you about the assessment, as you might imagine, there's, thousands of pieces of data. How long did they take on this email? How this or that? That's noise if we give that to a client. What we do in our data integration session, I'm talking specifically about our assessments. The same could be said for when we're doing an engagement survey and you want to understand, is your organization happy or whatever. It's about boiling that data into something that's meaningful to them. So for us, if I'm thinking about that individual executive assessment, we have three bottom line things. They've told us, what are your three key business imperatives to make this company grow? They get a red, yellow, green on that. They will then say, well, why do you say that? Well, of course, here, let me take you to the next slide, right? There's a competency model, no more than 12 competencies that we report out on. And it's balanced between things that are about sort of the thinking part of the data, right? The operational decision-making, the strategy, things about leading others, coaching, talent, things about interacting with people, like building strategic relationships, and then a category that's about really your self-regulation. How do you present? Are you calm, stable, that kind of thing? So we'll just report on those 12. We're always then, and then we have the personality data, which goes a level deeper, but we never throw a report over the wall. I know people who do that. We're very much about.
When you say throw a report over the wall, what do you mean?
Oh, I mean, there are companies that you can go online, do an assessment. You can go to them, do an assessment, and a report comes back to you as a leader, and you're just looking through that. We have a point of view that, there's professional interpretation that should go with that. And it's a little bit reckless, honestly, to give people some of that without that conversation. So we will only do it in the context of a conversation.
Okay.
And then sometimes we'll get questions, particularly from the people who are high diligent. It's a personality characteristic. People who are perfectionistic, very prudent, they want to know, well, what exactly showed you this? And it's a judgment call. Sometimes we'll say, well, this was, there were several emails in which this happened. But usually when people are digging into that level of detail, it's a bit of a deflection. And so we try to keep the conversation at, what did you ask about? Can they help you deliver on the business? What did you ask about these 12 competencies and the why of who they are as a person? And so that's our job, to make it not be noise and make it be information.
And redirect them. I just heard that in your conversation.
Yes. Well, sometimes it becomes coaching it's weird, like it's informal coaching in the data review. Like you learn something about, say, the deal partner or the board member, and you're like, help me understand why you're asking this question. And then you get a little bit into who they are.
I was just going to say,
by the way, sorry,
it's okay.
Which, by the way, sometimes it results in, maybe I should do this thing too. Yeah, maybe you should, because maybe there's something in the dynamic of the two of you, right? Like the boss and the person that has been sent to us. There's something in that dynamic, back to that everybody contributes some, that we can help you navigate. And we have definitely done that.
That is fascinating. And I was just going to say that redirection is an art by itself. That is all I was going to say.
As a great podcast host, right? You're like, oh, let me redirect this person.
Well, I was thinking more from the perspective of when you have an argumentative employee, keeping them on task with what you're actually talking about. Because once they start getting into the minutia, you're exactly as you said, they are deflecting. They've decided they are not going to take accountability for whatever it is, and they're deflecting. So it's a skill. Do you coach on things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, that is leadership, right? And
Absolutely,
so, like in that case, it's a lot of times, if I were coaching a leader dealing with an argumentative employee, I would say things like, well, why don't you give them a mirror? Why don't you say to them, it sounds to me like you're resisting the feedback I'm giving you on that. Help me understand why I feel that way about your reaction. What are you thinking right now that is making you ask all these questions about the details instead of staying at the top level point that we were talking about? And then just let it sit. And the art of silence is also key, right?
Yes. I think one of my favorite redirects are, is that helping us solve the problem right now?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of my favorites. Oh, this is awesome. Okay, so I could probably talk about this all day long. All right. What types of businesses do you work with? I think I already asked you this, but is it geographically situated or anywhere?
No, we have businesses really all around the globe, mostly in the United States and Canada, of course. But by the way, that simulation, the personality inventory I talked about, available in multiple languages because there are assessors all over that are affiliates. So we're not geographically bound. Our sweet spot are companies that are privately owned. So no longer working with, the Fords and the GMs of the world, that are growing. And most often they are held by a private equity firm, which simply means somebody has come in and infused capital into this business to help it grow. And they have an expectation that this growth is going to happen quickly. And you need help with your people if you're going to do that. And that's not an indictment of the people who are there, right? It's a massive change. And helping people at the front end, I guess that's another sweet spot. People who understand that if you help people be their best, your company is better. And we don't have to go convince you of that, evangelize that. That's who we work with. We don't love working with, so we tend not to get those calls. The people who want to cut businesses up, like that's just not as much fun, Helping a business grow through their people is any middle market, lower middle market company that's doing that. That's who we work with. Doesn't matter where they are.
Perfect. All right. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you today?
I feel like we talked a ton about assessment of people. Maybe what else can you do to make organizations and their people better that has nothing to do with assessment?
And would you answer that, please?
I would. Yeah, yes. A lot of team dynamics. So helping and assessment will always be an underpinning of this, right? If we have assessment data where you can say, here's Janie's personality and here's Sally's personality, and here's why they might be having this friction, but helping teams figure out how to work together. And I don't mean in like a kumbaya, like, oh, we're all going to love each other. I mean, given who you are, and given what this business needs to accomplish, who's most likely to fill the role of accountable for this work stream? Who's most likely to fill the role of contributing to this work stream, right? So practical outcomes, not like a feel good. So team effectiveness can be, those kinds of workshops can be very impactful. And then, just understanding what's going on in your organization. Okay, so again, there's some data, but like an engagement survey.
I actually meant to ask you about the engagement survey when you mentioned it, and I forgot to circle back.
Okay, well, perfect, right? We'll do an engagement survey. We have our own, or we can customize for a client. But the thing I will say is, it doesn't make any sense to ask your people what's going on and then do nothing with it. So what we won't do is just do a survey for a company. We're going to want to help their leaders understand how to build an action plan that is meaningful, how to not take on too much. We're going to want them to understand that the minute you ask people what's going on, satisfaction does dip, because now they have an expectation. All those questions you asked them gave them a vision for what they could have. And so it's natural to have a dip, and you don't freak out when that happens, right? You still continue to collect data. You still take actions to make a difference, and involving the organization in how to do things differently, but not, for goodness sake, building like long bureaucratic, like, oh, we've got 27 committees to work on our survey, and by the time they get anything done, it's time to survey again. Like, not death by survey, but there's a place for engagement surveys if they lead to action, not just collecting information.
Absolutely. And that's something I stress with my team. It's like, if you're going to give a survey, what are we going to do with it afterwards? Okay. And while we certainly don't survey at the level that you do, but we do at times, find out like, hey, what do you find valuable here? What do you find needs improvement, sort of things. And I recommend that every business do that, no matter how small they are, because you would be surprised at what you learn.
Yes. And I will say, even though I was like, oh, you should use a professional for all these things, doing something, taking a step, writing a survey yourself, and just asking people what they're thinking and what's going on is certainly beneficial. And versus like putting your head in the sand and just telling people what to do and not knowing what's going on in your organization.
Absolutely. One of the things, we call it a happiness survey. One of the things that we put in there is, hey, were you hired in the last 6 months? If so, what was your onboarding experience? We look at all of those things, and that actually helped us create a new hire orientation process when people started opening up and going, hey, this was a little chaotic. It didn't make sense or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, we definitely have some room to improve there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, why wouldn't you, right? Like, the people coming in from the outside are the ones who have the freshest perspective, capturing that right away and learning from it. I mean, that's a good organization. It's a learning organization. You're not like so arrogant that you think, oh, we don't have anything to change around here. Of course we have things that change. We're growing, different people are coming in, and we're all learning as we're doing it.
Yeah, change is inevitable, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Oh, Sandy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Before we go, tell our listeners how they can find you.
Okay. Well, you can find me all over LinkedIn because I'm there a lot, but also Lodestone's website, even we're Lodestone People Consulting, but that's long. So our website is lodestonehr.com. You can also find me at many conferences. Yeah, that's the easiest way to find us. And there's on the Lodestone website, right? There's of course, contact us, learn more from us. And we would just love a follow on LinkedIn. We post a lot of content there. So that's an easy way to learn more about us and to find us.
Okay. Where are you speaking next?
I am at a private equity conference in San Francisco, Markets Group conference in October.
Cool. Very awesome. Well, again, thank you for being here today, and we'll make sure all of your contact information is in the show notes.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for today's podcast, where I focus on women in business and how we can be allies to one another. Please rate us on the podcast app that you listen to the most, and send me any ideas you have for podcast topics or any other feedback. I love to hear from my listeners. You can reach me at Denise@dcavirtual.com.